Once again, thank you very much for joining me. My name is Philippe Charles Pierre. I am the co-founder and CEO of Semsee. We are a software company, obviously in the insurance space, and really our claim to fame is that we are helping independent agents go from lead to quote. We're incredibly happy to partner with HawkSoft and offer this webinar. We really hope that it's as informative as we think it will be. But please, again, if you have any questions or things that you want to raise, please do so in the chat and we'll get to all the questions we can. Our hope today is to be able to highlight for you a few things, right? So we want to highlight, one, what some of the sort of things that are happening within insurance from a technology perspective. We do want to make some parallels to what we see in other industries. I will tell you that while insurance is relatively new to me, I have been involved in a number of companies in the technology space, in the travel area, as well as in real estate. In both of those instances, building technology for agents, whether they be travel agents, real estate agents, and today, insurance agents. And so that's a little bit about me. Our company's a little over 3 years old. We have been in market for about 1.5 years, and we're serving hundreds of agencies and working with at least almost a couple of dozen carriers, again, helping agents go from lead to quote. Our product is specifically in the commercial insurance space. Some would call it small commercial, but the way I really think about it is we help connect agents through technology to portals where they could have gotten a single quote on their own, one portal, one carrier at a time. But instead, what we do is we've created a digital platform that allows the agent to get multiple quotes without having to rekey. And part of why we're excited about doing this webinar is to not just talk to you about Semsee, but really to talk to you about how technology can work together. And I think a terrific example of that is our relationship and the sort of the nascent relationship we're having with HawkSoft, where we are working to integrate Semsee with HawkSoft so that information and data can flow very easily between the two companies. Ultimately, the idea being to limit the number of screens that you all have to have open on your probably 3 or 4 monitors in order to do your jobs on a daily basis. What I want to do today is that I want to show you a quick presentation to highlight some of the key points around technology, how to think about technology, a little bit about Semsee, and then I'll obviously give you a demo of Semsee as well. And then from there, we're happy to do a Q&A session. I'd like to leave as much room and as much time as possible for Q&A, because oftentimes that's where really the good stuff comes out when people have questions based on what reality that they're facing. And again, if you have any questions, please do ask them in the chat. I just noticed that a few people have asked if you're all automatically muted, and that is the case. So so I cannot hear you if you're asking me a question verbally. Okay, with that, I'm going to share my screen, and I'll wait for the host to give me access to that. And as we do that, really part of what we are wanting to do is to first give you a glimpse as to how we see digitalization and how it impacts insurance, and then from there, I'll walk you through how it works with Semsee. Great. So what we want to do is highlight for you the importance of technology and our relationship with HawkSoft. I think is beneficial to that. If you have any questions, like I said, you can ask them in the control panel. But with that, we'll start. So digitalization is, for us, first and foremost, I think within the industry, really not a threat, right? It's very much your greatest tool as an independent insurance agent. We say it's a tool because what makes the independent agent powerful is the fact that you are consultants, the fact that you help your business owners understand the risk and then be able to connect them with the right carriers and the right products for their small business. And essentially, part of what digitalization ought to be doing is to really make it easier for you to combine the disparate tasks that you're doing into one seamless experience. But the other piece piece of digitalization that's important is the fact that it ought to speak to the consumer's digital first sort of approach. Many of the small business owners that are starting businesses today across the country are millennials, or they're under 30 or 40, and they're very much used to a digital first type of approach. That's something we found in travel recently, obviously, and in real estate, and it's certainly happening in insurance. And so you not only want digitalization, excuse me, to work for you as an agent, but you also want it to sort of make it easier for the consumer or the risk or your client to be able to communicate with you. And ultimately, what it all means is transparency. Transparency in terms of helping your risk understand what their options are, but it also helps you as an agent really be able to access the most amount of products in the least amount of time, so that you can offer options and choices to your customer and the risk. For example, one of the things that I find interesting is the fact that Compass, this new company in the real estate space, is blossoming. And they're blossoming because they've built a modern real estate platform by pairing talent, which are the real estate agents, with technology, so that they're creating essentially a holistic experience for the agent as they're working with their buyers and their sellers, right? Their analytics and their marketing technology, they really help to optimize the workday for each of these agents, whether it be from pricing properties more accurately, to determining the best times to list, in the same way that Airbnb does the same thing for those who are hosts, and trying to figure out what's the right price, what's the best time, what are the things that you can do to maximize revenue. Those kinds of tools and analytics, I believe, can be incredibly powerful, not just in those industries, but certainly in the insurance industry as well. So when you think about technology, it isn't, to me, sort of having 5 different pieces of software that work independent of each other. I think it's extraordinarily important, and we believe at Semsee that you ought to be working with technologies that really work together. And so what this slide shows you is that with HawkSoft in the middle, HawkSoft already partners with some terrific brands and some terrific technology companies, but they don't all have to sort of work independent from each other. Meaning Semsee, for example, we go from lead to quote, can easily connect with an agency, Zoom, which is a CRM program, or a Podium that helps your business sort of understand itself within the internet and within the technology landscape. And all of those sort of things and technologies can really work cohesively to provide a much better user experience. So if you have a client in agency Zoom, you can set up a criteria that says, you know what, if my client and his or her premium goes up by more than 10%, automatically set up an alert, send the data from agency Zoom into Semsee, start a remarketing program, and based on what potential options that there are, we could sell them either a new policy or let them continue with the existing carrier. And once you make that decision, being able to sort of send that off to HawkSoft to store for you, and then the whole cycle can begin again year after year after year. So what does that mean? It allows you to do things that you really couldn't do before, meaning you would potentially have a CRM program that essentially works on its own, and then the results of which would have to be copy pasted or create a spreadsheet to take into any kind of platform for rating or to each individual carrier. And then you'd have to sort of get ACORD forms and then have it downloaded into the AMS. And that's what we're trying to sort of avoid. And what we're trying to do is connect the dots between the various pieces of technology that exist, and especially that exists within the HawkSoft suite of partners, into one efficient play. And so it's about making the most, essentially, of what you have. So for us, we believe technology makes the information you already have much more functional and dynamic, right? So that they can all essentially work together. We believe that it can also revolutionize the way you communicate with clients. And for small agencies, you can leverage technologies to project a presence that's even vastly larger than what you are. And we think, for example, using a CRM to be able to to send out reminders or send out appointments, being able to then connect it to HawkSoft, and then be able to ultimately connect it to even a quoting system and platform such as Semsee, really creates one holistic campaign that you can set up once a year and allow it to happen in an automatic way. So ultimately, what it also means is that you can do much more with less, right? You can make your job as an independent agent easier, and your customers will be happier while growing your small commercial book. And in the end, what we really want is for us to help you automate what could be cumbersome tasks and enabling you to spend more time as a consultant or a client. We think that that is a fundamental part and a value proposition to technology. We don't think technology should take away the role of the agent. We actually think that technology should remove some of the redundant rekeying, some of the disparate ways in which you potentially are doing your job, so that you can spend even more time with each of your clients, consulting them, or even obviously marketing yourself to getting additional clients, but ultimately still delivering to your customer and your client a incredible experience as they're purchasing insurance for their small business. But we know that quoting small commercial continues to have its challenges, right? From cumbersome data gathering to a convoluted matching of clients and carriers to the rekeying of data and the clunky manual quotes. And part of what we do at Semsee is we really want to take that part of sort of what we call the disjointed approach to getting quotes and creating one seamless experience so that the agent can have an easier time to be able to get you one quote in a much faster time, but ultimately using that same amount of time to get you multiple quotes. And so part of how we've built our system is really based off of the Semsee, SEMCI, which is single entry multiple carrier interface, and we added the SEE at the end because part of what we want to do is to help you see everything. And so our mission is to be able to use the portal for the agent to allow them to see all the options that are out there within their appointed set of carriers and connect them to the right connect your client to the right carrier. I'm going to stop here for a second and look at the chat to make sure that there are if there are any questions. Don't see any. So in terms of the carriers, we will walk you through the carriers that we have signed up, and we'll get to that in a moment. Ultimately, Semsee, as I mentioned before, helps you get from lead to quote, and we do so by connecting you, and I guess in a short way, answering some of your question, to about 20 or so carriers. To date, we work with BOP, Business Owners Policy, as well as Workers' Comp. And in a couple of weeks, we'll also be launching our first set of auto products with 3 carriers. And so that's what Semsee does today. These are the carriers. I think there was a question about that in the chat that we have to date. And so these, there are over 20 carriers in our system, but we're always looking to add additional carriers as well as additional lines. And so you will continue to see the list of carriers grow over the course of time. So how it works. Part of how we connect the carriers is through an API, which a number of our people in the technology space do. But we've also built a system of robots that allows the agent to connect that allows us to connect to the carriers who don't have the APIs. And what that means is that there essentially are no carriers that are off limits for us to work with. So we're not just tied to carriers who have APIs or carriers who have certain lines of APIs. We can essentially work with any number of carriers, whether they have an API or not. And what we then do is we create a database comprised of thousands of carrier questions from all the carriers that we work with to generate one online form. And then once you complete that form as an agent, that we then use the API or our robotic process automation to connect and submit those answers to all of your carriers. So part of what we want to do is not create a different screen that takes you away from all the things that you already do. And so we've also made the system really try to work with your within your workflow. So we bridge to other carrier sites. So any information that you've entered into Semsee, we actually bridge right into any of the carrier websites as well. And so you can log in directly to a CNA, to Guard, or to Liberty, and see the data entered within Semsee also exist in each of those carriers. And then the other thing is you can easily download any of the information that you've entered into Semsee into any of the cords. So for example, the 125, the 126, or the 140, 130, or 160. Ultimately, we want to make it easier for the agent to sell the policy. So we want to do this beyond price. And so we do that by doing things like creating a quote comparison chart, so that whether it's Guard or Hanover, Liberty, or Travelers in this case, and these are all fictitious quotes, by the way, you can look at each of the quotes and compare the various coverages between the carriers, so that you're not just selling on price, but you're selling your customers on value. And again, this really underscores the power of technology and user experience to making the life of the agent much easier, because not only are you now with one entry getting multiple quotes, but without having to do any additional work, you've now got a breakdown of the various quotes that you've received. You can isolate which quotes work the best for your customer, and then essentially leverage this to send to your customer. Again, all in one fell swoop. Ultimately, what we want to do is empower the agents, again, to be more effective, connecting them to their appointed carriers, promoting in-depth quote comparison, and providing more time for them to consult their risk and to consult their clients. And with that, I want to switch over to the demo. If there are any questions, let me know. One of the questions that came in is, are all these questions reduced to the line of business you're quoting? So yes, so all the questions that are in Semsee, essentially the same questions that you would see in the portal. We've removed the duplicate questions, and if there are questions that apply to a BOP and a workers' comp, we've obviously made them one, and you can actually quote all BOPs, but you can also quote a BOP, a workers' comp, and an auto at the same time without having to re-answer the same questions. Thank you for that question. So this is Semsee. The first thing that you do when you log on to Semsee is you see this page, and this page is essentially what we call your dashboard. But I'm going to step away from the dashboard for a second and start from the beginning. When you first are in Semsee, the first thing that you can do is log in and enter your carriers, and it's pretty straightforward to add a carrier. You go to Add a Carrier button. You download, so you click down on any of the carriers that apply to you that you have an appointment with. And once you do that, you also put in your carrier's, the portal name, the password that you use, the agency code, and you can nickname that agency because you can put in either a primary or a service center, if not both. In addition to that, you can put in the underwriter for which you work with in that carrier. That's all optional. Once you do that for all of your appointed carriers, as we've done in this case, you're essentially ready to quote from all of these carriers that you are appointed with. Next, and this is also optional, but we find this to be a very powerful tool, is that you can, for each of the carriers you're appointed with, essentially select a number of presets. And what we mean by that is, are there questions such as the liability limit for each occurrence under general liability? If you want to set the limit at 2 million across the board, you can do so. That means every time that question gets asked, you can essentially default to the 2 million number, or the building contents deductible to $1,000. So those are all the kinds of things that you can do within Semsee, again, to make what we think is already a pretty easy product even easier for you. We also use some of the defaults that the carriers use as part of the application. But lest you worry, once you're in the application, you can always make edits as well. Once you do that, you're actually ready to quote. And so it's pretty straightforward to start quoting. The first thing you do is you click a submission. And this is an example, by the way, where the integration with a HawkSoft or a CRM could come here. So if you hit select an existing client, for example, this is where once connected, if you are a HawkSoft user, for example, or you're using Agency Zoom, you can start to type in the name of a business, and we can populate and give you a drop down of the businesses in your CRM or in HawkSoft that may apply. And if it's there, it'll pre-populate the form for you. I'm going to start a new submission and quote something called the Pink Olive in New York City. Couple things that I want to point out. As you're typing, we also connect with Google to make sure that if it's the right business or the business that you're interested in submitting for. Once you hit yes, you can essentially start to see that the form gets pre-populated with the information that we've gathered from Google or any of the other third parties that we work with. Your next step is then to pick the policy types that you would like, whether that means doing a BOP by itself or a combination of BOP and workers' comp. And as I said, in a couple weeks, you'll also be able to add auto. For simplicity's sake, I'll start with a BOP. Once you pick the BOP, you then get the listing of all of the carriers that you are appointed with. And again, we only work with the carriers that you're appointed with. From there, you can choose to pick Hanover, Liberty, and Travelers, but you can also, as I mentioned before, download into any of these PDFs that are relevant to a BOP. Once you pick that, the next step is to pick a class code. And I want to stop here for a second. Part of the reason why we ask you to select class code on a per carrier basis is that's essentially the behavior that happens today in each of the carrier's portals. But lest you worry that this feels cumbersome, in about a month, we're actually redoing this page, which means that you're going to now select the class code once, and we are actually doing the hard work on the back end of connecting it to the relevant carrier. And so in this scenario, we're doing it on a per carrier basis, but it'll give us about a month. And what you'll notice that we ask you that question once, and then on the back end, we connect it to the appropriate class code, whether it's the individual codes that Liberty Mutual has, or the 97 NICS code that Hanover uses, or the 2017 NICS code that a Travelers or others use. The second point I want to make is if you are on this page and you pick a class code that is not appropriate or is not of appetite for a particular carrier in that state, we also alert you of that here. And what that does is it allows you to either remove the carrier or find the class code that is appropriate for this business. So I picked Soybean Farm in New York City on purpose, knowing that Hanover would reject it, but the Pink Olive is in fact a quick printing. And what you'll notice is once you put it in there, we do help you isolate from there and auto-populate for Hanover. Liberty Mutual is pretty straightforward. They categorize it stationary, and then on down the line for the carriers that you want to quote with. And so those are the kinds of things that we then do to make it much easier for you. I'm just going to pick that. And once you do that, you are now into the actual form that will get submitted to Semsee, and then Semsee submits it on your behalf to those three carriers. A couple things that I want to note. The first thing that we do at Semsee is we remove any of the duplicate questions from the forms. And what we then do is limit the questions to carrier unique questions, as well as questions that each carrier may ask. However, they have different drop downs. As you see, Hanover has a different list of drop downs than Liberty Mutual than they do for Travelers. And what we do here is we allow you to sort of answer it for each carrier. However, if you've picked something like corporation for entity type that's applicable for the other two, we auto-populate it. Obviously, you can change it if you so choose, but we do that. The next thing that we do within Semsee is really isolate for a particular set of carriers that you've picked, which questions are optional. So for example, in this case, for the 3 carriers, FEIN is an optional question. And if you want to describe the business, you can do so. But what's really interesting, and what's the way we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do this compared to your experiences potentially with the actual carrier portals, is you're able to skip around the form. And go to different sections of the form at your leisure. But we will identify for you, for example, with this yellow, when you've skipped a page that requires you to come back and fill a question that is required, such as the year established, for example. The other thing that we do, and you'll see this in all of our applications, is the fact that, for example, with the coverage terms, here are all the presets that we selected at the beginning. So for business personal property valuation type, here are the presets that I set up for Hanover and for Travelers. The property deductible, here's what I set up for Hanover and Liberty. The general liability occurrence, the general aggregate limit. Those presets are all now coming from what I established at the beginning, and now they're flowing into this form really, really nicely. There are a couple other things that I want to show you about the form. Again, the goal of which is to make your lives easier and to be able to quote as many policies, BOP or workers' comp, and ultimately auto policies as possible, is we allow you to also flag questions. So for example, if you don't know what you want to answer for the medical expense or the EBL or the EPLI, you can actually flag those questions and continue to answer all the other questions that you may have an answer for. And then when at the end or the next day or after lunch, you can come back and just go to the flagged questions where it'll isolate the questions you flagged that you need answered. And this could be something that you can do with another colleague. And ultimately, one of the things that we're going to do is allow you to share that with your customer so that instead of filling out the entire form, they're filling out a subset of the questions to show how much work you're doing for them. And ultimately, when they fill it out in their email, it'll populate directly into Semsee, into the form. In addition to that, if you want, you can write a note to either yourself or to your colleague or even to the risk before you send them. Unless you worry, we do not share the notes with the actual carriers. And then the last thing that I'll point out, we do have a couple things that we think can make your jobs easier. One of which is if you are either a new agent or an agent who may not be accustomed to the questions that a particular carrier is asking, we do identify and isolate for each question who's asking that question. And we do so because we know that some of the questions that you may get asked, you don't know who's asking. So, and ultimately we do that in order to, again, make it much easier for you to understand which carrier is asking which question. And especially for a new agent, it really allows them to get to know the carriers and sort of their appetite much easier. The other thing that I wanted to share is that as you're going through the form, we do have knockout questions. So if you answer a question in a way that knocks you out of a particular carrier, we will let you know that within the form. And you can always either change the answer or remove that carrier from consideration. We obviously have the qualifying questions. We also have the exposures. So anything and everything that the agent would have to fill out or the carrier would need in order to give you a quote, we've essentially consumed within Semsee to present to you in as neat as a way as possible. And so what happens when you finally hit submit? You get to a page that looks like this, which has, for example, these 4 these four results from Liberty Mutual, CNA, Utica National, as well as Chubb. Couple things that we've added. I mentioned to you that you can compare quotes. So if you pick these three, for example, you can pick these three, hit compare quotes, and that'll help identify the various coverages that you've either selected or comes with that policy from each carrier, so that you can see the price, see the carrier, but also see the various coverages and how they're different for each of the carrier. That way you're able to really isolate which is the best for you. And again, these are fictitious sort of quotes, so don't take the numbers at heart. But if you wanted to pick the lowest, you can certainly do that. But if you wanted to pick maybe the in-between because it's not a bad price, plus there's additional coverages that sort of matter to your client, you can do so as well. And ultimately, the way that Semsee works is once you're ready to bind, you can actually hit the button here, and it'll take you directly to the Liberty Mutual portal, for example, where you can see the quote. All the information that you've put into Semsee is already here, so you don't have to re-enter, and ultimately you can just simply bind from here. So that provides you a good sense of Semsee, and you see that the quote that we have here is the same quote that we had on Semsee. So that's Semsee. Let me stop here and answer any questions that might have come. One of the questions that came in is, can you add an MGA like Appalachian Underwriters? Absolutely. In fact, we are in the process of adding a number of MGAs to our system, actually in August, September, and October. And if there are carriers, MGAs, or MGUs that are important to you, please feel free. We also work with networks. We work with wholesalers who use our products to be able to provide a technology solution for a network's members or a technology solution to a wholesaler's broker or retail partners. Thank you for that question. The next one is somebody asked about emailing a list of carriers. If you email us at info@semsee.com, info@semsee.com, we can also answer any additional questions you have. And if you're asking for specific carriers, please let us know, or at least let us know which carriers you're appointed with, and we can send that off to you as well. The other question is, what about GL as a standalone or workers' comp? So workers' comp already exists and can function as a standalone product. So you can either combine BOP, workers' comp together, but you can quote the BOP by itself. You can quote the workers' comp by itself. We're going to be adding GL as a standalone product relatively soon, but we did want to start with a BOP since we know that for a number of agencies, that is a good chunk of how they do their business. The next question is, can you upload Accord form from HawkSoft Accord Forms? So the answer today is no, but that is actually something we will talk to HawkSoft about, being able to suck the data from HawkSoft into Semsee. And so you may actually not need to download the Accord to send to us. Our goal is to be able to connect to HawkSoft electronically, and they've been terrific to work with, by the way. And our goal is to be able to essentially get the data from HawkSoft right into Semsee. The next question is, if it requires underwriting approval prior to binding, does Semsee notify you? Absolutely. So whenever you get a quote, you can either just get a quote and it's ready to bind, but as you saw, even for Liberty Mutual, you might get a quote, but it requires a referral to underwriting for either additional questions or what have you. We will let you know. If you get declined, we will obviously tell you, and we will also give you a reason why it's declined. So for example, carrier A, B, or C declined because it's too close to the coast, those kinds of things. And so, yeah, so we absolutely do that. Thank you very much for those questions. If there are any others, please feel free to continue to do that. So the next thing I want to do is I want to sort of go back to the presentation. So just give me 2 seconds and I'll go back to the presentation. And if there are any other questions, feel free. It looks like a couple more came up, so I'll take a look at that now. The other question is, in terms of cost for Semsee, so Semsee is based on the number, is really based on your size of the agency. And so we built Semsee essentially into sort of 4 categories, whether you're a very small agency, a smallish agency, a medium-sized agency, and a large agency. And our pricing is annual pricing, although you can do it monthly, and it's there's unlimited number of users and unlimited number of submissions. And the pricing ranges from roughly $1,000 for the year to about $5,000 for the year. Don't see any other questions. So with that, I will share my screen to the rest of the presentation. So ultimately, we're very happy and proud of what we have built at Semsee. And as you can see, one of our users, Joe Wagner at Wins, who's also a HawkSoft user, said, with Semsee, I don't have to rekey data. One form generates multiple quotes from multiple carriers that are bindable. The less we do, the better. The more efficient we are, the more business that we can generate. And that's really our goal. And those are the kinds of quotes and the kind of feedback that we appreciate. And essentially, that's what we are essentially striving for. As it relates specific to Semsee, I know there were, in HawkSoft, there were a couple questions. Our goal with the partnership is that we streamline new and the remarketing of commercial quoting for BOP, workers' comp, and then ultimately auto and some of the other lines that we have. And the idea is to integrate with HawkSoft in the next few months so that data can flow from HawkSoft directly into Semsee. And so that's our goal. Sorry about that. Not sure what happened here. And so that's our vision. The way that we think about phase 1 is really about this streamlining effect, right? So if you want to quote a new business, or if you want to remarket a business that's already existing within HawkSoft, we want to make that much smoother and easier for you. And as I said, so this is about you not having to go into HawkSoft, download an accord form, take that form, and then bring it to each of the carriers, typing it into carrier A, type it into carrier B, type it into carrier C or carrier D. The idea is that we would take the information from HawkSoft directly via Semsee and populate a form that you can begin to utilize to get the 4 quotes all in one place. And so that's our phase 1. Phase 2 is taking that one step further, which is to make the communication between Semsee and HawkSoft bidirectional, meaning not only can you get information from HawkSoft into Semsee and start quoting, but then once you have finished quoting, taking the data that you've entered into Semsee, especially for a new risk that may or not already be within your HawkSoft system, and having it sent into HawkSoft. And that's those are the kinds of things we want to do as part of phase 2. In terms of some of the activity happening within Semsee, here's some numbers which you all might find interesting. On average, the average BOP premium is about a little less than $4,700. We're seeing about 3.2 number of carriers per BOP submission. So it's not like people are submitting to 8 or 9 or 10 carriers. They're really going from 1 or 2 carriers that they might try to 3 to 4 carriers on average. And we're actually seeing that average continue to rise as we're adding more and more carriers into the system. And ultimately, we think that every time an agent submits, assuming that they're going to try to get 4 quotes, they're essentially saving about $24.75, right? We made an assumption that without Semsee, maybe you're paying someone or $33 an hour, and if they're getting 4 quotes, 15 minutes per quote, and being able to translate that into Semsee numbers, in the same 15 minutes that you would get to 1 quote or so in the carrier portal, you can get all 4 quotes, and that's how we get to a savings. And so We think that can be incredibly powerful, not only in terms of efficiency for an agency, but it also is a terrific cost savings, making both new business and remarketing a heck of a lot more profitable on the commercial side. And on the workers' comp, the numbers are a little bit different. It's a bit of a newer line for us, which is interesting. So the average premium is about the same, but there's a smaller number of carriers per submission, partly because there's slightly less number of carriers on our platform for workers' comp than on a BOP. But again, we're saving about 32 minutes per submission on average so far this year. And I will end with a couple quotes from some of our customers. Again, the value of Semsee from Carlo here is that it's about ease of use and saving time. Another partner of ours at DGA, the platform is a great tool for us as they're a wholesaler, so they're able to touch a number of markets in a fraction of the time that they would have done without Semsee. So with that, that's the end of the official presentation, but I'm happy to answer any additional questions. I did see another question come up. So the question here is, our agency has a BOP of almost 11 million, but the commercial portion that is about 200,000. We're just starting a commercial division. We have hired an agent specifically for that. Knowing what would the annual cost be? So the annual cost would probably be, an agency your size, would be probably about $1,000 to $1,200 for the year. Any other questions that you all may have? So as I mentioned, there's a couple other questions here. So Semsee is really just a commercial lines rater. We do not do anything on the personal lines. In terms of an MGA, we can work with MGAs. We can connect to any MGA or an MGU. In fact, we're going to be connecting to a Tune as an example, actually in the month of August. And so there are a number of others. And then we are also beginning to work with and talk with E&S carriers about being added into the platform. In terms of our integration with HawkSoft, that is in the works. We're going to be announcing it pretty shortly, the timing for that. But we'd love to hear from you if what we've presented in terms of how we're going to connect to HawkSoft it doesn't work for you, or if there are other things that you want to make sure that we consider that's unique to your business. We're happy to, again, answer any questions that you may have. If you want to email us at info@semsee.com. We're happy to provide you a more in-depth demo to you or any members of your team. If there are carriers that you are interested in having us integrate with, please let us know. We get requests all the time from our customers, and we oftentimes oblige them pretty quickly. But I'll leave you with this, right? So Semsee, we're very proud of what we've built. It's an integrated tool, but we've built the system to be able to also integrate with any number of other technologies that you may be using or thinking about using, whether that's a HawkSoft to an agency Zoom to a Podium or any other technology. When you're looking at technologies, you want to make sure that they are as friendly as possible to integrating with other technologies, so you're not stuck with one piece of technology for 10, 15, 20 years and not feel like you can get out from under them. And so we've built the technology to be as easy as possible to be integrated with any other tools that you may have within your agency. But again, I want to thank you all very much. I want to thank the team at HawkSoft and Hug for having us and allowing us to do this webinar. I really hope it was informative, not only for you to learn more about Semsee, but also to give you just at least at a high level, a big picture, ways to think about technology and how technology can help your agency, whether it's from the lead to quote aspect, or even if you work with a Semsee or HawkSoft, how to think about and making sure that you're thinking about how it all integrates together so that you don't have disparate systems, but they're really a cohesive system to make your agency work as smoothly and as efficiently as possible.